And I'm sure you know what he does in Venezuela to promote the mass mobilization in urban areas and also defends the Venezuela's sovereignty, and also to promote a lot of the People Alliance in Latin America. So now this workshop we adopt a kind of dialogues, and then let our students and friends raise questions, and Hernan will respond to your questions. So questions, please.
So my question is inspired by Professor Gibson's talk just now, and then because in her talk he talked about alternative economy and talk about the local currency, community currency, and then because we learn from the media that Venezuela is going through a very serious inflation, and so whether there are some practice also in community voucher or community currency that could, just help the community people to sustain their well-being in the economic crisis.
Actually, I've been thinking like kind of in the same, because the discussion over these days has been pretty related with the local economies. And I would like to maybe talk you a little about some experiences in Venezuela that I just mentioned passing through my presentation, but in fact we have some experiences of what we call direct exchange, which in Venezuela we call it trueque, which it's a system of direct exchange between producers and consumers. In some places, they use some local currency. They used to call it. They used to name it after some specific situation or cultural characteristic of that zone, of the region where they have that currency. For example, that could happen in urban land, but actually also in rural land. Recently, in 23 de Enero, which is a neighborhood in Caracas, they have an experience of a communal currency, which maybe kind of the experience that we've seen the last days when we have the walk on our some experiences here in Hong Kong. They use that communal currency. The people can use it in the space, in the territory of the commune. In that case, is it's a commune in one of those 3,000 communes that use that kind of system. But also, you have some experiences in rural areas where you have. I'll tell you about a specific experience that is situated in the west of the country, which is called a communal peasant market. It's an Ticoporo, which is the name of the region of the harvest reserve, a forest reserve that is situated in there. And in that market, it starts 9 years ago, when there was no crisis. It's simultaneously the translation. Okay. And in that case, it emerged as a proposal because a lot of peasants in Venezuela, the little farmers, depends on the roads, and the roads used to be from sand and rocks. They are not pavimented. They are not established roads. There are more like sand and rocks, and they struggle a lot to can recover the situation of the road to being able to go out the production. But in this case, after the discussion between all the communal councils, they decide that they need a market where they can exchange directly without intermediaries. And that experience begun at that moment 9 years ago, but right now it has grown a lot because the necessity in the crisis makes that really valuable. I mean, everyone needs that space. Welcome. Everyone needs exactly what we have been seeing during the crisis, that it's some kind of struggle between, it's a confrontation between the use value and the exchange value that Marx categories, that in the crisis, and I will say that not only in the Venezuelan crisis, not in the civilization crisis against all the world, we have kind of the same situation. The poor people who lives from his own work struggles a lot to being able to live. And in that kind of situation, the possibility to have local economies where you can exchange directly, it's really strong. So I think that's an important common link. And actually, yeah, in the middle of the actual situation, that's a really important reference in some communities. As I told you about two current examples, but it actually happens in different lands, especially where they are organized tissue. Maybe that comment.
So in order to protect their hegemony, actually U.S. The hegemony of the U.S. dollars, actually U.S. In a symbolic way use their military demonstration. So they would do a lot of military exercise all around the world to protect their hegemony, and then in that way protect their U.S. dollars, dominance of U.S. dollars. And the other day I heard that there is number of 2 million people of military force in Venezuela. So is that also a way or an important role in protecting the Venezuelan currency and the local currency? So what do you think that military force has a role in? And also in our local community in Wuhan, we also do local currency, we do barter, but it seems that it's kind of trivial. It cannot have like a systematic unification in the usage of this local currency. What do you think would be like a helpful way or a structure to have this systematic usage of local currency? The other question is, do you think community currency in your context or in other global contexts, could it be a force to go against the capitalist economy? Could it play a role to fight against the capitalist economy?
There are different things in there. One of them, it's about the people's militia. Actually, since the coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez in 2002, as I told you, there are many lessons. One of them have been about the media, and I told you about the alternative media that was developed. But also, one of them was the necessity to have more participation of people to face any possible threat from the United States, because at that point it begins to be imminent, the possibility of an aggression from the United States. And it starts like something like maybe 7 years ago. I don't know exactly the year, but it started this policy of form a people's militia, so everybody can come and have military training to be able to defend the homeland if it's necessary. And actually, you have a lot of people doing, well, even some of us, some weekend we are part of the training. Just in case, as I told you, that's not actually Venezuela has never gone to invade any other nation. Our history is more of defend ourselves and even try to liberate some other countries in the region with Simon Bolivar at the front. But also, it's interesting to say that, in one hand, that's a policy that pursue the defending the country, but also in that defense, as he said, is actually we have to defend in the economy and the possibility to live, because in a war, instead what we see in the movies, not is always about to defeat the enemy, fighting with him directly. Actually, the strategy of siege, it's one important strategy because you look that the other surrender. And in that case, to have food, it's really important. So one of the last guidance lines of the president of the Republic, Nicolas Maduro, has been to the corps of people's militia that start producing productive rural projects. I think that obviously when you have maybe I say you could say that maybe 100 years of oil extraction makes a culture, and that's a renting culture, oil culture, not productive culture, and that's heavy in our minds, in our practice. It's really common just to buy stuff and sell it again to another people. Everything is done. That's part of a popular set. You said, why you have to produce it? It's already done. You have to only buy it. That's part of the cultural, the old culture. But in this period, we are, the people is fighting against that culture. I think that more than always in the whole modern history in Venezuela. Which what I'm trying to say with this is that actually we are doing stuff to increase the productive level, especially in food, but it's not so easy for us. And then in the other matter, I actually think that in order to satisfy the livelihood, the needs for life for the people, each time more we need to develop local economies not based in capital accumulation, instead local economies based in reproduced life. And local currencies could be an example of that. Some experiences that I told you too, like communal markets or a system of direct exchange in communities, I think that are part of that. And I think that it's really possible to build that as a system, to link all those experiences, have common principles. Actually, in Venezuela, we have some experiences during these last 4 years where farmers on the western of the country starts to link with communities, organized communes in Caracas, in the capital city, to exchange. and they starts to organize the consumption. And again, I think that's when I heard some of the experiences that you told us about, I really find really common spaces in there. And I think that actually in this moment, we were talking before, Jade and I, about this period of trade war between China and United States. And I think that's part of a global war, which is about, at this point, one of the important fronts is who controls the technological infrastructure for the next step of the capitalism, which someone called the fourth industrial revolution. And I think that 5G, it's a key element in that. And I said that because I think they are stuff really linked. The elites are each more fighting to reconfigure the capitalist system, and I think that part of that reconfiguration, it's each day more taking away the value of the workforce. When you see what is about this fourth industrial revolution, you can see that you have each more a lot of developments that are towards to not being necessary the workforce that we need before. So each more we will have people in the cities, more people in the cities that actually doesn't have a way to live. And I planned that because I think that it's part of this debate, this discussion.
So, my question is to my big brother from Venezuela and my big two sisters from Brazil. That's what we love. And then to Hernan, the revolution is the big project. But after this project comes to a success, then it comes to the problem that when the worker becomes the master, then it becomes another round of oppression and all that. And then corruption may also appear after the so-called success of the revolution. So in Venezuela, in your context, do you have solution or measures to tackle the issue of corruption? And to our friends from Brazil, I learned from your presentation that there were a number of comrades from your movement that were murdered or in some way assassinated by the government or by some forces. So actually it is quite dangerous. And what measures or what solution do you have to fight against this force? Or what if the government they use violence to take back the land that you occupy? What would you do at that time? Your organization? Yeah.
Pensar a questão da violência não é pensar uma questão simples para nós.
To think about violence is not a simple issue for us.
Historicamente, os assassinatos no campo têm aumentado no Brasil.
Historically, the assassinations in the murders in the rural areas has been increased in Brazil.
Nos nossos acampamentos, adotamos algumas estratégias.
In our settlements and encampments, we have been adopting some strategies.
Entre elas, montar, entre os coletivos que falei, o coletivo de segurança.
Among them is to create, among the sectors that I discussed yesterday, the sector of security.
Esse setor de segurança ele é responsável
This sector of security is responsible
por monitorar os ataques
to monitoring the attacks
ou os possíveis ataques aos nossos
or
territórios.
possible attacks to our territories.
Mas permanecemos com a ideia
But we keep in mind the idea
que lutamos pela vida
that we fight for life.
e não nos armamos para isso.
And we do not take up guns for that.
Então, temos soluções que são soluções coletivas a essa violência.
So we have solutions that are collective solutions to this violence.
Nos momentos de enfrentamento também,
In moments of confrontation,
contamos com aliados que são de fora dos nossos assentamentos.
we have
Dos
some
acampamentos.
allies that are outside, that are not part of encampments or settlements,
Parlamentares,
such as politicians, parliamentaries,
mídia alternativa
alternative media outlets,
e outras pessoas que podem nos ajudar
and other people that can help us
a reportar o que acontece no território.
to denounce what is going on in our territories.
Acho que é isso.
I think that's it.
The thing about when the workers became the masters, I'm right now like developing some research about what does it mean the metabolic reproduction of society, because you have like a lot of thoughts and practice that used to flow, has his own metabolism, and when we study and we educate ourselves for policy, for struggle, sometimes you used to think that we have to take the power, and sometimes we think that it's about to take the power of the state, and that's part of maybe of the democratic way that we have passed through in Venezuela. But I think that part of that we have learned is that sometimes you think that you are taking the power of the state, and sometimes that power of the state is taking you. That doesn't mean that I am against take the power of the state. I think obviously that's been really important for us. Most of the things that we have accumulated as potentials during this time are about that. But I think that we have to take it with less naive position about it, because sometimes we don't understand what we are taking, and to change that metabolism, we need to know it better. And I think that there's a principle that someone has stated sometime, I think that here in China, which is that the practice is the criteria of the truth. So all the practice that we have during this time should be theorized to understand a little better where we fail, we have more problems, and what can we do to improve the class of the struggle of classes in our case, to know how sometimes a worker, when has to exercise the power, maybe exercise it in the other way. But actually we have experiences of the opposite of that. Actually we have essays of different people trying to commanding from obey the people. That's part of the tensions inside the revolution. And actually I think that the issue of corruption is part of that metabolism, because sometimes we in Latin America have thought that the corruption it's a thing mainly about ethics, or the governments of the West used to say that corruption sometimes it's about modernization of the state. I actually think that it's more about the change of the way we practice or exercise the politics. It's a transformation of our way of defining the power. We think that people's power is one of the most important ways to abolish the corruption, to confront it, because it's about social control of every process, but also about different ways to handle the common thing, the public thing. It's about self-management ways. It's about self-governance ways, which it pretty much what used to happen in an organized commune, or also in campamento in MST. It's about some people who start to handle the common things, and for that they have to self-manage, they have to self-govern, they have to have even progressively struggle to have the means to control his own situation. And I think that's pretty much the way to confront something that I insist is part of the metabolism of our society. In Venezuela, it has been configured, the state, the modern state, to allow and be part of the disposition mainly of the oil. And that's a corrupt state from the beginning, because that's the job for the one it was configured. Then in the schools and in the movies, they told us otherwise. They told us that the state is to protect us all, but that's not true. Its real original configuration is for that. Maybe the United States of America have another configuration of state, which I think that it's also a lie too, because there are a lot of people, poor people in the United States that actually they don't have the means to live. They don't have the conditions too.
Can I make a quick comment on
Sure.
the?
Yeah, please.
Just to add to this discussion about corruption in Latin America, there is a trend right now, and I think this is an important subject to understand what is going on in Latin America, which is the trend to, on one hand, reinforce the idea that Latin America is completely corrupted and we are all corrupted by nature, and on the other hand, to instrumentalize this historical need, this historical pursuit to fight back corruption in Latin America, but to enhance regime change in the region. We saw that in Brazil. The theme of corruption, the issue of corruption, was instrumentalized to criminalize a political party and to criminalize a political project that was being implemented in the country. And we saw this trend in other countries in the region. So I think it's something to keep in mind when we think about what is going on in Latin America. That's it. Thank you.
A mídia também na América Latina
Media, traditional media in Latin America,
é dominada pelos interesses do império.
mainstream media in Latin America is dominated by the interests of the empire.
Os meios de comunicação no Brasil, por exemplo,
Mainstream media in Brazil, for example,
são patrocinados por grandes empresas.
they are sponsored by big business.
E a burguesia brasileira, em sua maioria,
And the Brazilian bourgeoisie, in its majority,
tem origem ou é aliada
tem origem
dos latifundiários, dos grandes
has
produtores rurais.
connections, or it's part of large landowners in the country.
Ainda no final dos anos 90,
By the end of the 90s,
houve um processo de começar a mostrar o que era o MST.
there was a process to start to show society what the MST was,
Principalmente desde 1997,
especially since 1997,
quando houve um grande massacre na região amazônica.
when there was a great massacre in the Amazon region.
O massacre de El Dorado dos Carajás.
This massacre is called the Massacre of El Dorado dos Carajás.
Para além do massacre, o MST em 97,
In 1997, the MST
organizou uma grande marcha.
organized a big march.
Os trabalhadores saíram e caminharam por mais de 1.000 quilômetros.
The workers walked over 1,000 kilometers.
A mídia não tinha mais como esconder o que era o MST.
The media could not keep hiding what the MST was.
Chegou ao ponto de fazer uma, não sei se aqui assistem, mas uma tradicional novela brasileira.
They even got to the point to create a soap opera that is very popular in Brazil.
Que se chamava O Rei do Gado.
That is called
The King. Do boi.
The stock king, livestock king.
E nessa novela acontecia um romance
And in that soap opera, there was a romance
entre uma sem terra
between a landless woman
e um grande fazendeiro.
and a landowner.
Muito ridículo.
It was very laughable.
Nesse momento também,
At that moment,
a mídia percebeu
the media realized
que havia uma simpatia do conjunto da sociedade para o movimento.
that the society as a whole was very sympathetic with the movement.
E começaram então fazer essas narrativas de criminalização.
So they started to criminalize, to create narratives to criminalize the movement.
Tudo o que fazemos e todas as nossas ações
Everything that we do and all of our actions,
tentam encarar como terrorismo.
they try to show it as terrorism.
Nos colocam como um movimento violento,
They portray us as a violent movement,
justamente porque questionamos a propriedade privada.
essentially because we are questioning private property.
Atualmente, o presidente da República
Currently, the President of the Republic,
anuncia que é preciso
he has announced that there is a need,
proteger as suas propriedades privadas,
that there is a need to protect private property.
autorizando os grandes fazendeiros a comprarem armas.
And he is authorizing landowners to buy guns.
E o que ele diz é que sem terra bom é sem terra morto.
And what he has declared is that a good landless worker is a dead landless worker.
E isso é muito grave.
And that's very complicated.
Com relação à segunda pergunta,
For the second question
de como é a vida em um assentamento,
of how is life in a settlement,
nos assentamentos normalmente as pessoas já têm acesso a algumas políticas públicas.
in settlements, people that live there, they have access to some public policies.
São políticas públicas que incentivam o crédito de produção,
Public policies that give incentive to production,
possibilitam a construção das casas
enable the construction of housing,
e possibilitam também a construção de escolas e de equipamentos sociais.
and the building of schools and other social equipment.
As pessoas vivem daquilo que produzem,
People live from what they produce.
produzindo para seu consumo, para sua alimentação
They can produce for their own, to satisfy their own needs,
e também para vender o excedente.
and also to sell the excedents.
Com relação à aposentadoria,
As regarding to social retirement,
este também é um processo que está em mudança.
this is also a process that is going through some changes.
Na ideia de aumentar a exploração sobre a classe trabalhadora,
they have this idea that they need to increase exploitation on the worker class.
Está em curso uma reforma do sistema de previdência.
So there is a reform on social security that is underway now in Brazil.
Atualmente, as mulheres podem se aposentar aos 55 anos.
Currently, under the law, women in Brazil can retire at the age of 55.
As mulheres do campo, né?
The rural workers, women that are rural workers.
E os homens aos 60 anos.
And men at the age of 60.
No caso dos trabalhadores urbanos,
when we talk about urban workers,
as mulheres se aposentam aos 60 e os homens aos 65.
Women can retire at 60 and men at 65.
A ideia que está em curso, ou o projeto que tem.
The project that is being discussed right now
é deixar igual o tempo de aposentadoria para trabalhadores do campo e da cidade.
Is to make the same age for retirement for rural and urban workers.
Desconsiderando o quão penoso é o trabalho no campo, o quão difícil é o trabalho no campo.
Without taking into consideration how hard it is the land worker.
Estamos travando uma grande luta para que isso não aconteça.
We are struggling for that not to happen.
Há uma compreensão por nós que devemos manter a aposentadoria como um direito conquistado.
We have an understanding that social retirement is a conquered right.
Isso.
Thank you.
Well, about the two things, about the two questions, about the liars in Venezuelan society, I think that maybe you can have a part of the people, the population, who thinks that all that is going on it's a responsibility of guilt of the government, and then they have the other part of the population who thinks that it's part of actually the USA blockade. More or less, those could be the most important perceptions of the situation. I think that most of the people could be exhausted about the situation, really wasted, really bad situation, and maybe neither believes in the right opposition sector, and neither believes in the revolutionary sector, in the government. Then you have like a little unmobilized base of support for the right opposition, and then you have, I think, that a little more muscle at the side of the supporters for government, which have the strength of mobilization and organization, which is an important difference from the other sectors. That's kind of a rough draw of what I think are the liars in the situation. Then, in the matters by the government, I think that on one hand, well, it has like two fronts: the international front, which is really important, which is to take care of every international instance to defend the sovereignty right of Venezuela, and that's a struggle in the some years ago in the OAS. Then we have retired from that space, which is the space that reunites the countries of the region of America, but which is also controlled by the United States. And then other spaces, other relations with the other countries that at this day recognize the Venezuela's government. Then you have the internal matters that are more about import food to distribute directly to some communities, to the more poor communities. Some like 6 million families receive food subsidized by the state, which are imported directly. And by the way, that's a core policy of resistance to the blockade. By that reason, the United States has recently applied some sanctions to avoid that policy. Then, in these years, has been a constant policy of raise salaries very, very closely. Like, for example, the last years, every 2 months, you have a rise of salary, trying to connect with the rise of the inflation. And then you have monetary subsidies, which are distribution directly to some families we has more difficulties. Those are more or less the situations. I will add to that that linking with the layers question. I think that there's a kind of an internal division between the people who thinks that could be resolved the situation with a free market tendency, and the people who think that what we need is more socialism from below, more communal ways to transcend, to being able to solve the situation. Till now, I think that an important victory in the common sense is that not yet in Venezuela, most of the people think that the solution will be neoliberalization and lose all the rights that we have achieved during these years, all the guarantees. Oh, I will also want a little tiny comment about corruption, because I think it's really important discussion for all of us, because actually that's kind of the in different periods the United States always have a different issue which can afford them to go with a strategy of offensive against the governments that they don't control. There sometimes was the terrorism, in other times was the communism, and right now I think that part of that thing is the corruption. And I think that we have to discuss more about what does it mean, because I will add to the discussion that for us, and we agree in that with decolonized theory that says that, which calls Enrique Dussel, who says that corruption is appropriation of the public, of that belongs to us, to all of us, to the people, and it's appropriated for a little few, for the interest of a group. And I will say that in order to that, when I think maybe about the last immobiliary crisis in the United States with all the bubble, what the government does was to take the public funding and save the banks that were and the other funding instruments. So they took what belongs to all the people in the United States and transfer it to the richest. So let's talk about corruption. I think that we have a very interesting discussion in there.
So the first question, the main idea is regarding, it's to all our friends. So the main idea is as the people who are fighting for alternatives and for better life for all of us. But we face the dilemma that when we move to the rural area and we move to places that are more disadvantaged, we as individuals also face the lack of healthcare. Our kids, our future generation face the issue of lack of quality education. And I wonder that in your context, as individual, do you also face this kind of problems? And your community, how as collective that you cope with the issue as a fighter, but also as a person who also want your well-being for you and for others in the community. And yeah.
Vocês enfrentam esse tipo de dilema entre você, o que vocês fazem como ativistas e essas necessidades enfrentam seres humanos também.
Yeah, so that what we speak can also become how we act.
Yeah. Que a gente fala, quem pode também se tornar o que a gente faz nos nossos anos.
And the second question is, we talk about our each struggle in our own country, in our own context, but we also talk a lot about the international struggle, international collective struggle. And today, we heard the case from the People's Assembly, and today we are here in the South-South Conference. But apart from those platforms, what do you think could be another way of organization or another way of getting together that could help us to have this collective effort towards our shared aim? Also, the question is regarding what do you think of China, as you are now in China, and maybe you have also known the revolutionary history of China. From our Mao's times to now, we have many good experience, but we also have painful lessons. What are the things that you think you could learn from the, your opinion, or what you think would be some experience or lessons that you see from our revolutionary history? And a very timely question is regarding the trade war between China and America, because the rise of China, many people regard China as a new empire, maybe share some similarities with US too. What do you think? And because of the trade war, the two so-called empires, they are fighting each other. Do you think that other countries could utilize this timing to do something for the alternative, for another kind of future? Yeah. Wow. Oh, and then he said that really appreciate being here and one more discussion maybe after class or something.
Acho que, em se tratando da primeira questão sobre o que significa viver no campo,
When talking about the first question of what it means to live in rural areas,
nós temos que pensar de que tipo de vantagens falamos no caso da vida urbana.
we have to think about what kind of advantages we are talking about when we talk about urban life.
E também quais são as reais necessidades humanas.
And also, what are the real human needs?
Para o nosso campesinato,
For our rural workers,
talvez a necessidade seja de condições dignas de trabalho.
maybe their need is to have dignified ways of work,
De poder ter seu tempo de descanso,
to have their time to rest,
de se alimentar bem,
to feed well.
o que não separa o imenso desafio que temos,
What does not
de em um mundo modernizado,
What is not a part of the challenge that we have in a globalized world
de superar o isolamento
to overcome isolationism
e as necessidades que a sociedade de consumo impõe.
and the needs that a consumption society imposes to us.
É um processo de formação de consciência
It's a process of consciousness building
acerca do que são necessidades reais.
on what are our real needs.
É evidente que a luta por educação
Of course, the struggle for education
é fundamental para a transformação de qualquer sociedade.
is essential for the transformation of any society.
Por isso temos lutado para ter escolas do campo
And that's why we have been fighting to have schools in rural areas
e promover o acesso da nossa juventude à universidade.
and to promote access for our youth to other spaces in society.
E isso tudo é um processo de muita luta
And that is a process that demands a lot of struggle
para garantir os nossos direitos.
to guarantee our rights.
Acho que respondo um pouco à primeira questão.
That's more or less the first question.
A segunda questão sobre a luta internacional,
The second question about the international struggle,
ainda que esteja muito vinculada à Assembleia dos Povos,
although it's very connected with the People's Assembly,
creio que tem também um espaço que precisa ser fortalecido,
I think there is also a space that we have to strengthen.
que é o movimento da Via Campesina Internacional.
That is the Via Campesina, the International Via Campesina.
O que temos visto na Via Campesina
What we have been seeing in Via Campesina
é que os desafios para a classe trabalhadora no campo
is that the challenges for peasants
ocorrem em todos os continentes.
they take place in all continents.
A luta por manter as sementes,
They struggle to keep the seeds.
a luta da violência contra as mulheres,
They struggle against violence against women.
é uma luta que é internacional.
Those are struggles that are international.
Por isso, esses espaços de movimentos sociais
That's why these spaces of social movements
e de pautas comuns
and common agendas,
são fundamentais.
they are essential.
Acho que não sou uma grande estudiosa da história chinesa,
I'm not a great expert in Chinese history,
mas admiro muito a história do seu país,
but I have a great admiration for the history of your country,
principalmente pela forma como resistem,
especially of the way you are resisting.
no que se refere à língua, por exemplo,
When we talk about language, for example,
e na manutenção do seu território.
and in the maintenance of your territory.
O que a vida nos ensinou também no Brasil
What life has taught us in Brazil
é que a transformação da sociedade
is that transformation of society
não passa necessariamente pela transformação do Estado.
does not go through necessarily a transformation of the state.
É preciso pensar em processos de formação da consciência
We have to think about a process of consciousness building
desde baixo.
from bottom up.
Entre as lições que também tivemos,
Among the lessons that we had
é que o modelo de produção do agronegócio
is that the agribusiness model
não nos serve.
does not work for us.
É ecologicamente insustentável
It's environmentally unsustainable,
e por isso também precisa ser transformado.
and that's why it has to be changed.
Então, creio que se podemos contribuir com algumas coisas,
So I believe if we can contribute with some things,
é a mudança da matriz produtiva.
is the change of the production model,
A produção da agroecologia,
the agroecological production,
a produção de vida no campo.
and life in rural areas.
vida de qualidade,
uh,
com educação, saúde e condições dignas de trabalho.
a life with quality, with education, with dignified conditions of work.
No que se refere à guerra econômica entre China e Estados Unidos,
As in regard to the trade war between China and the United States,
creio que vivemos um momento complicado.
I think we are in a very complex moment.
Achávamos, enquanto BRICS,
We thought as BRICS
que poderíamos alterar essa correlação de forças.
that we could change this correlation of forces.
A China poderia ser para nós a formação de um bloco contra-hegemônico.
China could be for us the beacon of an anti-hegemonic bloc.
Vocês têm um potencial gigantesco
You have a huge potential
por serem o maior mercado consumidor do mundo.
Because you are the largest consumer market in the world.
E se pudéssemos pensar em alternativas,
And if we could think about alternatives,
gostaríamos muito de poder comercializar os nossos produtos aqui.
we would love to have the opportunity to sell our products here
Em um sistema alternativo, financeiramente alternativo,
in a system that is economically alternative,
em que seja possível garantir preços justos,
where it's possible to guarantee fair prices
fugindo da lógica das commodities, por exemplo.
and distancing ourselves from the logic of commodities, for example.
É isso.
Thank you.
Você-
Well, I actually have to. I've been pretty amazed during these days because I value a lot the opportunity to know better China. Actually, in Venezuela, instead the alliance which actually exists and it's like really important for this moment for Venezuela between China and Venezuela, we actually know very few about China, and I think that this is a really important opportunity to know China, but by your words, by your work, and I appreciate a lot all this effort, all the effort that you are doing to support this dialogue, which actually have really difficulties, like for example the language, and I think that to strengthen relations in the global south, that's one of the issues that we need to work on. We've been talking these days about the possibility to exchange information about what you're working, what we're working, but we need to see the thing of translation, and it's not a little issue, it's an important issue, I think, because, and again, I think that we need to know better what we are thinking and what we are doing, and that's kind of a complement with what Anna says, which I agree, that we have to strengthen the platforms that already exist, but we have to make. In Venezuela, we've been talking about, thank you very much. We have been talking about during these last years the necessity of have a popular diplomacy or people's diplomacy, which is international relations, people to people. MST are champions in that matter, and we are trying to learn about what does it mean. I think that actually the dilemma between the rural and the urban, it's a common issue for this whole humanity, because that's the way that has been configured the capital. And I think that each time more. In Venezuela, we have 80% of the population in urban centers. And that's really high, but it's actually the same tendency in the whole region, in the whole continent, and probably in the whole world. I don't know which country is his tendency is to diminish the urban tendency. Everybody is going up, and I think that's a real big problem. In our case, in the last history, by the things that I've been telling you, actually, by the action of the state and the action of the communal organization, we kind of could have better situation in the rural areas than we have 20 years ago. But still is a struggle to accomplish that the more peripheral areas, communities could have the meanings for life. And as I said, like 100 times during this discussion, I think that we actually need to have common struggle for that. I think that in this new era, the class struggle is about life, and it settles a whole different configuration. I think in the matter of China that we actually have a lot to learn about the history. Indeed, in Venezuela, during the beginning of the commune proposal, we start to reading some from the communes here in China. Chavez had a book which was about the Chilijin commune, and it was really interesting. We were checking it a little. I think that actually study the revolutionary process are a necessity in a possibility to struggle the different challenges that we have. Actually, right now in Venezuela, are a debate or a discussion about some people who says, well, we have to take the Chinese way. And I don't think that Venezuela could apply the Chinese way, if there's something like that. But we also think that we need to study and understand more what's going on here in China. When I've been these past days walking by the streets of Hong Kong, I kind of have a lot of questions, and I really need the possibility that we make that dialogue, because instead the distance between us, the geographical distance between us, I think that there is a lot of things going on that are in common, and we need to understand them better. I only have to say that Hugo Chavez used to say that he doesn't think in China as a new empire, because he said so far till this moment the only living empire is the United States of America. And also he says instead China has a big economic power, doesn't have the same policies of military actions, aggressions, invasions against our people, and doesn't have the same policy, same economical aggression policy. And he says that's a quite important difference. I'm not trying to reduce it to that. I'm only trying to say that for us, we know a little about China. That's kind of an important issue. That's it.
So I will start with the last one, with the trade war, because I must admit I'm quite fascinated by how China is responding to it. Thank you. And it's actually connects to the other one, to the other question on what we can learn from China. For many Westerns analyzers, researchers, it might feel that China is responding to something, when in my assessment, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think the trade war, Trump's trade war against China, is actually just accelerating a long-term plan that has been being implemented by China for quite some time. For example, to overcome the dependence on the dollar, on the US dollar, for foreign investments, or for I don't know, selling and buying oil and other commodities. So I think China is playing a very important role in bringing down the dominance of the United States as the hegemon, as the only hegemon in the world, because it's showing that we can actually have alternatives and other ways to connect with each other, not only at economic level, but also in means of diplomacy. One very good example is how China is dealing with Venezuela and with Iran, that are both countries that are deeply affected by sanctions. And China is creating the way, China and Russia are creating ways to overcome the dependence on the SWIFT system, because that's one thing that we always talk about the United States. We always say, we always look at the United States as the military potency. We always think about that kind of war, that kind of traditional war, but we never talk about things like the SWIFT system, that is an incredible power that the United States has. Imagine you are the one who decide how and when all the money of the world goes to. So it's something that we have to discuss more. And I think this trade war that Trump is it's putting in place against China is just leading to acceleration of what China is trying to do. And that's it. Thinking on the long term, as China does, thinking about state policies that goes beyond the term of a presidential candidate, or I don't know, 4 or 10 years, China thinks about a strategic plan for 100 years. We might now not be in the position that we want to, but we have a plan for 100 years. I think that's something that we have to learn from, because we are always reacting to the context, to the political context, to what is imposed to us, and not thinking on how we are going to be in 100 years. And that's something that China does. Just to finish, because we are pressured by time, on the question of how to build internationalism, on how to strengthen our struggles internationally, I think one of the things that we have to connect, not only in intellectual and theoretical level, but also in a personal level. Having the opportunity of being here and listen and get to know you is something that I'm going back to Brazil with another understanding of China, of Chinese people, of your struggles. And that's something that we have to do. We have to overcome the language barrier, of course, but also overcome the preconceptions that are imposed to us about our peoples, our struggles, and what are our challenges.
Thank you very much.